This is an AQA Psychology A-Level revision video for Paper 2, topic approaches, with a specific focus on the social learning theory. So to begin, let's have a look at where social learning theory fits into the specification and where it is on the big picture. So social learning theory is the second learning approach which you are expected to know and be able to apply and evaluate. It's section II on the specification, and as you can see, it states you need to know social learning theory, including imitation, identification, modelling, vicarious reinforcement, the role of mediational processes, and Bandura's research. So let's begin by looking at the main assumptions of social learning theory. Social learning theorists, and why they are considered learning theorists just like behaviourists, agree with behaviourists like Pavlov and Skinner that we learn directly from our experiences through classical and operant conditioning. However, Bandura, who is a social learning theorist, argued we also learn indirectly by observing and imitating others around us in our environment, especially if those are rewarded for their behaviour. So a little quick summary for you that has appeared on screen. You might want to pause to process this, but it just shows you the similarities and differences between learning theories. So your classical and operant conditioning, which is behaviorism, and then social learning theory, which is its standalone theory. So the key concepts for social learning theory that are outlined on the specification are on the screen. The only one that's missing is mediational processes, because we need to dedicate a bit more time to that. So if we base our explanation on the main assumption that we learn through our environment, through nurture, indirectly through other people, the observation of others is where we learn behaviour from. So these key terms are crucial, starting with imitation, which is the copying the behaviour of others. Identification, which is when a person associates themselves with a role model and wants to be like them. So when you identify with someone, you find things in common, or you find things that you like about them and you identify with them because you want to be like them. Maybe they've got a good job, lots of money, maybe they're really attractive, or maybe they're a similar age to you. So they possess characteristics that are similar or that you would like. Modelling is the imitation of the behaviour of that role model. So it's from the observer's perspective. They model, they imitate that behaviour that the role model displays. And then vicarious reinforcement is that crucial bit that Bandura has spoke about, in which when you observe someone else get reinforced for their behaviour, you are likely to imitate it. So the word vicarious itself means indirect. And you might have heard adults sort of use this in everyday language, living vicariously through younger people. It's that idea that young people are a bit more active, a bit more social, and so they live vicariously through you. They live that social, exciting life through observing you, basically. So moving on to the role of mediational processes. Mediational processes, by definition, is the first bullet point. They are the cognitive factors, such as thinking, that influence the learning of new responses. So Bandura acknowledged, and this is where Bandura in social learning theory is different to behaviourists like Pavlov and Skinner, because Bandura acknowledged that there are processes that lie between stimulus and response, and he called those mediational processes. So to mediate is to sit in the middle of, to lie between stimulus and response. Social learning theorists argue behaviour is not as simple as seeing a stimulus and responding to it. There are things in the human brain, mediational processes, that lie between those two things, stimulus and response. And these mediational processes determine whether a behaviour that is observed actually is carried out, whether it's actually imitated. Because if you think as humans, the amount we witness each day, the amount we observe, we simply do not copy every behaviour. It's not as simple as stimulus and response. So that is why social learning theory is often described as a bridge between behaviourism and the cognitive approach, because of course the cognitive approach focuses only on mental processes and behaviourists focus only on stimulus and response. So social learning theory is the bridge between the two, because it looks at how those cognitive factors, those mental thought processes are involved in learning. The 4 mediational processes are attention, retention, motor reproduction, and motivation. So these are the 4 processes that lie between stimulus and response, that lie between the observation of a behaviour and whether it is actually imitated. So the first 2 relate to the learning of the behaviour, and the last 2 relate to the performance of the behaviour. So putting this into context of an example, you might have a young child, girl or boy, observe mother putting on makeup. Father compliments, says how beautiful the mother looks with that makeup on, and that can act as a form of vicarious reinforcement. That young child witnesses the praise, the positive reinforcement that the mother is getting, and vicariously becomes reinforced and wants to wear makeup to get that same desirable consequence. However, the role of mediational processes would explain that this child needs to have paid attention to the mother putting on makeup or to the father complimenting as well. Retention, they would need to remember the process of the mother putting on makeup to know how to actually apply it themselves, and they would have to be able to physically perform that behaviour, to apply the mascara, to apply the lipstick. And finally, motivation, they've got to actually want to, so they've got to have the will to perform that behaviour, and that links then back full circle to whether the behaviour was rewarded or punished. In this example, the mother received positive reinforcement for the father, the mother was praised, the mother was complimented, so maybe that child would have the motivation to then imitate that behaviour. So those are the 4 mediational processes that are crucial in social learning theory. It's come up in past papers numerous times, applying your knowledge of mediational processes to novel scenarios like I just did with the mother and makeup. So be prepared to consider those 4 mediational processes in any context that they might give you in a question. Now we move on to Bandura's research. Sample consisted of 36 boys and 36 girls, 2 different research procedures, one in which the child watched the adult behaving aggressively towards a Bobo doll, or some children watch the adult behaving non-aggressively towards the Bobo doll. So that research procedure is essentially investigating the role of observation and imitation. Procedure 2 is a little bit more complex because the children saw an adult who was either rewarded for their aggression, punished for their aggression towards the Bobo doll, or no consequence. So the findings were, when given their own doll to play with, the children who had observed that aggressive behaviour were more aggressive towards the Bobo doll. And furthermore, the children who witnessed the adult get rewarded, who saw that vicarious reinforcement, who went through that vicarious reinforcement, were then also more likely to imitate the behaviour with the Bobo doll. So this suggests that children are likely to imitate acts of violence that they observe in an adult role model, but also modelling aggressive behaviour is more likely if the behaviour is rewarded, vicarious reinforcement. So there are 2 really important conclusions there. Number 1, this idea that children do learn through observation of role models, and number 2, vicarious reinforcement increases the likelihood of behaviour being displayed. I'd like you now to pause the video and to think of some strengths and weaknesses of social learning theory, and that might well include some strengths and weaknesses of Bandura's study. In 5 seconds, we'll go through the answers. So, some strengths and weaknesses here. There is supporting evidence for social learning theory, the study by Bandura. You can then use these methodological criticisms, the fact that it was a lab study by Bandura, it was an inflatable Bobo doll, there's likely to be demand characteristics, what else are you going to do with an inflatable doll? But then the theory itself is more comprehensive than behaviourism, as we explored with the mediational processes. Considers the role and recognises the importance of cognitive factors. They argue behaviour is not as straightforward as stimulus-response processes like Pavlov and Skinner suggested. However, the theory disregards biological factors, so nature, There might have been a role of testosterone in aggressive behaviour, and you can further that point with the fact that although it wasn't a finding in this video, you can further the point that the boys in Bandura's study were more aggressive than the girls. They chose more aggressive toys, they chose more aggressive words, swear words, etc. That could be better explained by the biological approach. So the fact that social learning theory disregards those factors is a weakness. However, back to the strengths, it explains cultural differences and the influence that the media has, and how things like eating disorders are more prevalent in Western culture simply through observation, imitation and role models. And it also has really important practical applications, so watershed policies and understanding the James Bulger murder. So I'm going to take these 3 points of cultural differences, alternative explanations and practical applications, and turn those into 3 peel paragraphs for you. So if you would like to pause the video, you can attempt to put that into peel structure, and then we can review some example peels in 5 seconds. So, social learning theory explains cultural differences in behaviour. So this is, of course, a good thing because it can account for how children learn from others, especially the media, and helps us to understand a range of behaviours. Linking that to these cultural differences, anorexia or eating disorders that are more common in Western societies suggests that that's not biological. If it varies across the world, it's not biological, it's not innate within humans. And so the social learning theory might suggest that individuals might imitate role model celebrities, especially if they see them being rewarded for their thinness, which is often broadcasted through Western media, magazines, size 0 models, that sort of thing in America, where it's seen as a desirable behaviour and people might learn through observation and imitation of that. Therefore, social learning theory can actually explain behaviours that do not have a biological basis. However, social learning theory is limited. It overlooks alternative explanations that might be equally or even more valid than social learning theory. So in Bandura's study, boys were consistently more aggressive than girls. I gave you the examples of choosing more aggressive toys like guns and swearing, etc. So social learning theory cannot account for this difference. Biological psychologists could, however, because biologically, boys might be more aggressive due to the differing levels of testosterone, the hormone that is linked to physical and sexual aggression. So this means social learning theory is limited, at least in its explanation of aggressive behaviour. And then finally, social learning theory is good because it has useful practical applications. The real life example of the murder of James Bulger, which involved 2 children who were exposed to violence through the media and through their families. So a lot of role models in their life of aggressive behaviour and exposed to violent video games and movies like Chucky. They actually observed and imitated learnt behaviour, which resulted in them murdering James Bulger. So social learning theory helps us to understand the importance of policies such as the watershed on TV, which is this idea that there should be no swearing, no sexual activity or no violence on TV before a certain time so that children aren't exposed to it, and also age ratings on violent video games. Now, much of those policies were born out of Bandura and social learning theorists' research. So it's got extremely useful practical applications, and this knowledge is really beneficial in society. So we have to recognise social learning theory, as a useful theory in that sense. So that concludes this video on social learning theory. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.